everybody. Happy July 3rd. We're glad you came out tonight. A little warmer than it has been in the past, but we are shaded and thankful for that. So, I know tomorrow is Independence Day, so we have programmed a lot of music that has an American theme, or what you would call a classic Americana, if you will. So we're going to open up with a pop culture march from the movie Captain America. Great writing by the film composer Alan Silvestri, who has composed for well over 30 years, notably movies such as Back to the Future and several Disney movies as well. So we hope you enjoy the march from Captain America. All right, so pop quiz. I know you don't have programs, but our next tune is entitled The Core of Discovery. Do you know who the Core of Discovery are, or were?
Lewis and Clark.
Oh, okay, we got an answer. Sorry, yeah. Lewis and Clark, right. So, two of the more famous American explorers, okay, who were tasked by President Jefferson with basically mapping out everything from Louisiana west. And they followed the Mississippi River and then the Missouri River and then finally trekked across land where they ended over in Astoria, Oregon. So this next piece here is entitled The Core of Discovery. And I was going to read something about it. Where did I put it? Oh, okay. So here it is. And it says, by any measure of scientific exploration, the core of discovery was hugely successful in terms of expanding human knowledge of the animal kingdom, of geography, of Native Americans, and especially the curiosity and the fascination with the American West, which I still think is a sort of a romanticized image that a lot of us have today about going west to see the mountains that we don't obviously have here, the deserts, and all that terrain that covers between here and the Pacific Ocean. So this is about Lewis and Clark, called The Core of Discovery. We hope you enjoy. I have a note in my notes here that says, after second piece, please announce pie. So, because I haven't said that yet tonight, but, you know, there's an old adage or a saying, at least I think I'm getting it right, there's nothing more American than the 4th of July and apple pie. So if you haven't gone over to our PEO sisters, which we are always so thankful for, I'm sure there's an apple pie over there. I was told that there's quite a bit of pecan tonight. So if you're a pecan pie fan, make sure you go over. A free will donation is appreciated. And we really appreciate them coming out week after week and putting in the time to make these wonderful desserts for us. So a round of applause for our PEOs. And, yeah. right. So if you follow Dave Schneider online or KILJ, they usually post our programs, and you probably were scratching your head. This next one's a little tongue-in-cheek humor, okay? The title is The British Invasion, which I thought was rather funny considering, you know, many, many years ago that tomorrow is our Independence Day. But this is not referring to the British invasion of 1776, rather the British invasion of the 1960s, where the most popular rock bands in the United States and around the world were indeed mostly from England. And so this is a mashup or a medley of several tunes. The first one you're going to hear is You Really Got Me, followed by Groovy Kinda Love, then For Your Love, then you'll hear a ballad of Michelle by the Beatles, and then it will close out with Mellow Yellow. So arranged by Johnny Vincent, we hope you enjoy the British Invasion hits of the 60s. So a little tongue-in-cheek humor with British invasion. But we're going to redeem ourselves with this next one. Not that we shouldn't need to redeem ourselves, but this is called Three Colonial American Tunes. And so it will open with the very famous folk tune Yankee Doodle. Okay, and then after that you'll hear Johnny Has Gone for a Soldier, a popular ballad that was used in both the Revolutionary and the Civil War. And then it closes with a tune called Chester. And I feel I tell this story every year, but it's worth telling again, that Chester was considered to be our national anthem before the Star-Spangled Banner was written. And Chester is a tune that you may recognize, but it's got a very grandiose sort of sound to it that has a very bravura, if you will, regarding a national anthem. However, the Congress elected to choose the Star-Spangled Banner many years later, and it has since been that. Chester was written by America's earliest composer, by a man by the name of William Billings. He was actually a school teacher and a composer on the side, and quite the fellow to look at. He had an eye patch and a peg leg. So, not a teacher you would want to make angry. Okay, but anyway, he actually wrote this tune, and it's very, very neat to hear it. So, this is Three Colonial Songs of America. Please enjoy. The next tune we have is simply entitled Shaker Variants. Now, many of you will know the tune. It's "'Tis a Gift to Be Simple" are the words to it. It was written by a group of American, there was a religious sect called the Shakers. And unfortunately, this is all that remains of the Shakers, as one of their tenets was that they could not have sexual relations. So unfortunately, that limited any more Shakers being born. And so, unless there are some that have converted recently that I'm unaware of. But needless to say, the religion didn't last very long, but the tune has remained very popular, and this is a really nice arrangement of it. So by Elliot Del Borgo, you're going to hear this passed around the band in a variety of ways. I think every section at some point gets the melody. It's really well done. So we hope you enjoy Shaker Variants by Elliot Del Borgo. All right, so musical theater really originated in the United States of America. And so almost all of the musical theater shows that you've seen in community productions on Broadway, off Broadway, even over in London, have their beginnings in the United States. And so in addition to the art form of jazz that we claim as one of our art forms here in the United States, you could classify musical theater as an American creation, even though the British were kind of doing it at about the same time, and productions such as opera and operettas and oratorios have existed for almost 1,000 years now. But musical theater, dancing, acting, staging, singing, has really become an American art form. And so our next set are some highlights from Greece. And so you're going to hear Born to Hand Jive, We Go Together, Summer Nights, which is very appropriate right now, and Grease Lightning, which we hope we see none of. So, but seriously, we hope you enjoy highlights from Greece by Paul Burton. Irving Berlin, as a lot of you will know, early American composer, very popular in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s. Gave us tons of classics, including things like White Christmas, Blue Skies, and many, many others. But one of his most patriotic and probably well-known tunes is God Bless America. And Mr. DePriest and I were talking about this earlier. About 12, 13 years ago, we did a big production at the high school. We brought in a gentleman from the East Coast who was a composer that conducted the band, and we did a work of his that was dedicated to the soldiers and survivors of the Bataan Death March. And in that, he used a great arrangement of God Bless America. And while I failed to spend some time and look up the history of the song, I do know at some point it was considered to be one of our national songs, and I believe it was edged out just slightly by America the Beautiful. So this is a really nice arrangement of God Bless America, and hopefully it puts you in a little bit of a patriotic spirit here. So we hope you enjoy this arrangement arranged by John Higgins. Again, want to thank you for coming out and supporting the band and all the players, especially on this rather humid, airless evening. There was a breeze when we got here. It has gone away. And I would want to take a moment and just wish you all a very happy 4th of July. We hope you be safe in all of your celebrations, and make sure to take care of those pets too. I know this is a difficult time for a lot of them with all the booms and bright lights and things like that. So enjoy your celebrations. If you haven't already, stop by for a piece of pie on the way out. We have one final concert. That'll be next Thursday up here in the park, same time. So we hope you can come out next week and join us for our final performance of the summer season. And as always, appreciate you being here and supporting the band and the community. So you may have noticed that I committed a cardinal Iowa sin, and that I did not open with a Carl King march. Okay. Rest assured, we are still going to close with a Carl King march. So this happens to be one of my favorites, very tuneful, and this is entitled United Nations. So hope you enjoy United Nations by Carl King. Have a safe and happy 4th, and we'll see you next week.